The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from 12 different species gathered around the massive holographic display. The burning planet of Kepler 442b rotated slowly before them, its surface engulfed in plasma storms that reached temperatures of over 50,000 degrees Celsius. Ambassador Zethkri of the Valorian Empire adjusted his breathing apparatus, his 4 eyes tracking the dancing flames that consumed what had once been a thriving mining colony. "The situation is beyond salvage," declared High Counselor Varthek, her crystalline form refracting the orange light from the hologram. 3,000 souls trapped in the underground facilities, and the plasma storms show no signs of abating. Our best thermal-resistant suits can only withstand 15 minutes of exposure before complete molecular breakdown. The assembled delegates murmured their agreement. The Kepler disaster had begun 3 cycles ago, when unstable stellar activity had triggered a chain reaction in the planet's atmosphere. The mining operation, buried 2 kilometers beneath the surface, had become a death trap as the plasma storms penetrated deeper each day. Rescue attempts by the Valorian military had resulted in the loss of 6 ships and 47 brave souls. Ambassador Thren of the Aquatic Coalition raised a webbed hand. The Jelani offered their cryostasis technology, but the plasma penetration makes surface landing impossible. Even our most advanced shielding cannot withstand direct exposure long enough for evacuation. "What about the synthetic collective's proposal?" asked Counselor Zefani, her antennae twitching with barely contained frustration. "Their mechanical forms should theoretically survive longer in such conditions." High Counselor Varthek's form dimmed slightly, indicating her distress. "The collective attempted a rescue yesterday. The plasma interferes with their neural networks within minutes. 3 units were lost to complete system failure." The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of life support systems. Each species represented had exhausted their technological capabilities. The Kepler survivors were running out of time, their underground shelters' power systems failing as the plasma storms grew stronger. "Perhaps," came a new voice from the chamber's entrance, "you should consider asking the humans." Every head, sensory organ, and optical apparatus turned toward the speaker. Ambassador Chen Wei of the Terran Federation walked calmly into the chamber, her simple blue uniform stark against the elaborate garments and natural forms of the other delegates. At barely 5.5 feet tall, she seemed almost childlike among the towering Valorians and massive aquatic representatives. Zethkri's vocal sacs inflated with what the translation systems rendered as scornful laughter. "The humans? The species that still uses chemical propulsion and primitive metal alloys. Ambassador Chen, with all due respect, this is a matter requiring advanced technology, not the enthusiasm of a developing civilization." "Indeed," agreed Counselor Zefani. "The humans have been part of the galactic community for barely 2 decades. Their technology is centuries behind our own. How could they possibly succeed where the combined might of 12 advanced species has failed?" Ambassador Chen's expression remained neutral, though those who knew humans well might have detected the slight tightening around her eyes that indicated controlled anger. "I understand your skepticism. However, I believe you may be underestimating what humans are capable of when lives are at stake." High Counselor Varthek leaned forward, her crystalline structure catching the light. "Ambassador Chen, we appreciate the Terran Federation's willingness to help, but this requires technology that can withstand conditions no known material can survive. Your species' greatest achievement in space is establishing colonies in your own solar system." "That's true," Chen acknowledged. "We haven't developed faster-than-light travel or energy shields or matter replicators. But we have developed something else, something that might be exactly what you need." The chamber erupted in multilingual discussion as delegates conversed among themselves. The idea that the primitive humans could offer a solution where advanced civilizations had failed seemed not just unlikely, but absurd. Ambassador Thren's voice rose above the chatter. "What exactly are you proposing, Ambassador Chen? What technology could humans possibly possess that we lack?" Chen smiled, and there was something in that expression that made several delegates shift uncomfortably. "Not technology, Ambassador. People. Human beings have a tendency to accomplish the impossible when someone's life depends on it. We call it stubbornness. You might call it something else. Surely you're not suggesting sending unprotected humans into a plasma storm." Zethkri's voice carried genuine concern now. "That would be suicide. No biological entity can survive such conditions. You're probably right, Chen agreed. But humans have never been particularly good at accepting what's possible and what isn't. Give us 48 hours. If we can't come up with a solution, we'll step aside and let you continue your deliberations. The delegates exchanged glances, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of confusion and skepticism. The humans were known throughout the galaxy for their unpredictability, but this bordered on madness. High Counselor Varthek's form brightened as she reached a decision. Very well, Ambassador Chen. The Terran Federation has 48 hours to present a viable rescue plan. However, I must insist that no human lives be needlessly risked in futile attempts. Understood, Chen replied. Though I should warn you, humans have a very different definition of futile than most species. As the session adjourned, delegates filed out of the chamber, their conversations ranging from amusement to bewilderment. The humans, barely more than an interstellar curiosity, thought they could succeed where the greatest minds and technologies of the galaxy had failed. Back on the observation deck, Zethkri gazed out at the stars, his colleague diplomat Hreshani joining him. Do you think they understand what they're volunteering for? Hreshani asked. I doubt it, Zethkri replied. Humans are still very young. They see the galaxy through the lens of their own primitive struggles. They don't understand that some problems cannot be solved through determination alone. Neither diplomat noticed Ambassador Chen standing nearby, making a quantum transmission to Earth. Her words were simple. Authorization requested for Operation Phoenix. 3,000 lives at stake. Conditions, unsurvivable. The response came back within minutes. Authorization granted. Marines launching in 6 hours. Tell them we're coming. Chen smiled again, but this time there was no humor in it. The galaxy was about to learn something about humans that no amount of technological advancement had prepared them for. The Terran Federation's orbital shipyard above Mars had never seen activity like this. Within 6 hours of receiving Ambassador Chen's transmission, 3 massive vessels had been retrofitted with equipment that made even veteran engineers shake their heads in disbelief. The lead ship, designated Phoenix 1, bristled with heat exchangers, ablative armor plating, and cooling systems that consumed more power than most planetary defense grids. Colonel Sarah Martinez stood on the bridge, watching her crew make final preparations. At 34, she was the youngest officer ever to command a deep space rescue operation, but her record spoke for itself. From the disaster at Europa Station to the civilian evacuation during the Titan mining crisis, Martinez had never lost a soul under her command, Colonel. The thermal engineers are asking for one final review of the descent protocols, reported Lieutenant Commander Jackson, his weathered face showing the stress of the past 6 hours. They want to make sure you understand that we're operating completely outside normal parameters. Martinez turned from the viewport, her expression grim. How far outside? The surface temperature of Kepler 442b is currently 52,000 degrees Celsius. Our best estimates give us maybe 20 minutes of operational time before hull integrity fails. The plasma storms are so intense they're interfering with quantum communications at a subatomic level. And the alien rescue attempts, Jackson consulted his datapad. The Valorians lasted 8 minutes before their advanced shields failed. The synthetic collective made it 12 minutes before their systems fried. The longest any rescue attempt has lasted was 14 minutes, and that was an unmanned probe. Martinez nodded slowly. Around the bridge, her crew worked with quiet efficiency, each person understanding the magnitude of what they were attempting. These weren't just experienced military personnel. They were volunteers who had stepped forward when the call went out for the most dangerous rescue mission in human history, ma'am, called out Sergeant First Class Rodriguez from the communications station. We're receiving a transmission from the Galactic Council Observation Fleet. They're requesting permission to monitor our approach. Granted, Martinez replied. Let them watch. Maybe they'll learn something. What the Galactic Council fleet observed as Phoenix 1 approached Kepler 442b defied their understanding of tactical logic. Instead of the cautious, technology-dependent approach they expected, the human vessel dove straight toward the planet at maximum velocity, using the plasma storms themselves to mask their approach. Aboard the Valorian flagship, Admiral Kethavar watched the tactical display with growing amazement. Their approach vector makes no sense. They're heading directly into the strongest part of the storm front. His science officer, a young Valorian named Jekti, was frantically running calculations. Sir, at that angle and velocity, they'll be exposed to plasma temperatures exceeding 60,000 degrees. Their primitive hull plating cannot possibly withstand such conditions. On Phoenix 1, the hull temperature alarms screamed continuously as they punched through the upper atmosphere. The ship bucked and rolled as plasma currents tried to tear it apart. But Martinez's crew held their course with grim determination. Hull temperature approaching critical, reported Chief Engineer Patel from the engine room. Forward sections are showing stress fractures, but the ablative coating is holding. Cooling systems at maximum, added Lieutenant Park from Environmental Controls. We're venting atmosphere through the heat exchangers to maintain hull integrity. Martinez gripped her command chair as the ship shuddered through another plasma wave. Time to surface? 90 seconds, Jackson replied, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. The mining complex should be directly below us when we break through the storm layer. What happened next became legend throughout the Galactic Council. Instead of attempting a careful, controlled descent like every previous rescue attempt, Phoenix 1 performed what human military doctrine called a combat drop, a barely controlled fall that brought them to the surface in under 30 seconds. The ship hit the superheated ground hard, its landing thrusters fighting against plasma winds that would have torn apart most spacecraft. Immediately, the rear cargo bay opened, and 12 figures in bulky atmospheric suits charged out into conditions that should have killed them instantly. Phoenix team, this is Martinez. The colonel's voice crackled through their suit communications. You have 18 minutes before we reach critical hull failure. Find those miners and get them to the extraction point. Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez led the rescue team across the burning landscape, their suits protected by a combination of ablative coating, active cooling systems, and sheer human engineering ingenuity. Each suit weighed over 200 pounds and made movement difficult, but the team pressed forward with mechanical precision. Contact, called out Corporal Thompson, his suit's sensors detecting the mining complex entrance 300 meters ahead. The access tunnel is partially collapsed, but we can get through. What they found underground amazed even the hardened rescue team. The miners, a mix of species from across the galaxy, had survived by retreating deeper into the complex and sealing themselves in the processing center. But their environmental systems were failing, and several aliens showed signs of severe heat exhaustion. Human rescue team, Vasquez announced as they broke through the sealed door. We're here to get you out. The reaction was immediate and emotional. A Jelani engineer collapsed in relief, while a Valorian supervisor stared at the humans in disbelief. How did you get through the storms? Our own military couldn't reach us. That's what humans do, replied Vasquez simply. Now let's move. We have 14 minutes to get everyone topside. The evacuation should have been impossible. 3,000 miners, many of them injured or weak from days of rationed life support, had to be moved through partially collapsed tunnels, while the temperature above ground continued to climb. The alien species represented had wildly different environmental needs and physical capabilities, but the human rescue team had planned for this. Instead of trying to accommodate every species' requirements, they implemented what they called Universal Survival Protocol, a brutal but effective system that prioritized speed over comfort. Everyone gets a human emergency suit, ordered Vasquez. They're not designed for your species, but they'll keep you alive for 20 minutes. That's all we need. The sight of Valorian warriors and Aquatic Coalition diplomats stuffed into crude human survival gear would have been comedic under other circumstances. But as the group moved through the tunnels toward the surface, there was only determination and desperate hope. Above ground, Phoenix 1's hull continued to deteriorate under the plasma assault. Martinez watched the countdown timer with growing tension. They were now operating on borrowed time. Colonel, reported Chief Engineer Patel, hull integrity is at 30% and falling. If we don't lift off in the next 8 minutes, we won't lift off at all. Understood, Martinez replied calmly. Phoenix team, time check. 6 minutes out, came Vasquez's voice, strained but steady. We're moving as fast as we can. In the Valorian observation ship, Admiral Kethvar watched the human operation with growing amazement. They're actually doing it. How is this possible? His science officer had no answer. By every calculation, every simulation, every prediction based on known technology and physics, the human rescue attempt should have failed catastrophically. Instead, they were succeeding through sheer audacity and determination. The rescue team emerged from the underground complex just as Phoenix One's hull began showing critical failure warnings. 3,000 miners, wrapped in human emergency gear and moving in organized groups, rushed toward the landing ship while plasma storms raged overhead. As the last miner reached safety, Martinez gave the order that would either save them all or doom them to a fiery death on Kepler 442b. All hands, prepare for emergency launch. We're going home. Phoenix One's engines screamed as they fought against the plasma storms that seemed determined to drag the ship back to the burning surface. The cargo bays were packed beyond safety limits with 3,000 rescued miners, their various species creating a cacophony of relief, fear, and amazement as the human ship clawed its way toward space. Colonel Martinez gripped her command chair as the vessel shuddered through another plasma wave. The hull temperature readings had gone beyond red into zones her engineers had labeled simply as catastrophic failure imminent. Yet somehow, the ship held together through what could only be described as the stubborn refusal of human engineering to accept defeat. Hull integrity at 15%, reported Chief Engineer Patel, his voice tight with concentration. The ablative coating is completely gone on sections 4 through 7. We're running on hull plating and prayers now. Altitude 15,000 meters and climbing, added Lieutenant Commander Jackson, breaking through the worst of the storm layer in 30 seconds. In the cargo hold, Staff Sergeant Vasquez moved among the rescued miners, checking emergency suits and providing what comfort she could. The mixed species created unique challenges. Aquatic coalition members needed constant hydration, while the crystalline Varthek required specific light wavelengths to maintain their biological functions. The humans had improvised solutions for each need, turning their military transport into a makeshift life support system for a dozen different forms of life. "How are you doing this?" asked Mining Supervisor Kethron, a Valorian whose 4 eyes reflected genuine bewilderment. "Your species doesn't have environmental adaptation technology. How are you keeping us all alive?" Vasquez smiled grimly as she adjusted the atmospheric mix for a group of methane-breathing Zephyrians. "Human engineers are really good at making things work that shouldn't work. We call it creative problem-solving." The rescued Jelani engineer Threndi floated nearby in a makeshift aquatic environment created from emergency bladders and recycled water. "But the plasma storms, how did your ship survive conditions that destroyed vessels with quantum shielding?" "Honestly," Vasquez replied, "we built it tougher and hoped for the best. Human military doctrine assumes everything will go wrong, so we over-engineer everything by about 300%. Above them, the ship finally broke free of Kepler 442b's atmosphere, the hellish glow of plasma storms falling away to reveal the blessed darkness of space. On the bridge, Martinez allowed herself a moment of relief as the hull temperature alarms finally stopped screaming. "Phoenix 1 to Galactic Council Fleet," she transmitted. "Rescue operation successful. 3,000 souls aboard and accounted for. Requesting medical support for environmental adjustment issues." The response came not from the Council Fleet, but from Admiral Kethvar himself. "Colonel Martinez, this is Admiral Kethvar of the Valorian Imperial Navy. What you have accomplished today defies every tactical analysis and technological prediction we possess. How did you succeed where our most advanced systems failed?" Martinez considered her response carefully. Around her, the bridge crew continued their post-mission procedures with quiet efficiency, running diagnostics on systems that by all rights should have failed completely. The fact that they were alive and successful seemed to surprise everyone except the humans themselves. "Admiral, with respect, I think you've been approaching this the wrong way. You've been trying to build technology that can survive anything. We built technology we could afford to lose and filled it with people too stubborn to die." The transmission fell silent for several moments. In the Valorian flagship, Admiral Kethvar shared looks with his staff officers, each trying to process what they had witnessed. The humans had essentially built a ship designed to be destroyed, and crewed it with volunteers willing to die for strangers they had never met. "Colonel," came another voice. "High Counselor, Varthek from the Council observation vessel. The Galactic Council requests permission to board your ship. We wish to examine your rescue protocols and discuss immediate medical care for the survivors." "Permission granted," Martinez replied. "Fair warning, though. We're running on backup life support. The main hull has holes you could put a shuttle through, and the coffee maker is the only thing on this ship that's still working perfectly. An hour later, the Phoenix One's main cargo bay had been transformed into a multi-species medical facility. Galactic Council medical teams worked alongside human medics, treating everything from plasma burn exposure to acute environmental shock. What amazed the alien medical staff was not just the humans' improvisational medical techniques, but their absolute refusal to accept that any patient was beyond help. Dr. Sarah Kim, Phoenix One's chief medical officer, worked on a synthetic collective unit whose neural networks had been partially fried by plasma interference. Using nothing more than spare electronic components and human medical tools, she was somehow restoring the artificial being's cognitive functions. "How is this possible?" asked the collective's chief medical subroutine, a sophisticated AI housed in a mobile platform. "Your technology should be incompatible with our neural architecture." Dr. Kim looked up from her work, her hands still deep in the unit's chest cavity. "Turns out biological and electronic systems have more in common than anyone thought. Pain is pain, damage is damage. The trick is figuring out what each individual needs to heal." Nearby, a team of human engineers worked with Valorian technicians to analyze the Phoenix One's surviving systems. What they found challenged everything the Galactic Council thought they knew about human technology. "These hull modifications," observed Chief Engineer Jekti, running his scanner over the ship's external plating. "The metallurgy is crude by our standards, but the structural integration is remarkable. How did you achieve such resilience with primitive materials?" Chief Engineer Patel wiped plasma residue from his hands and grinned. "Simple. We assumed everything would break, so we made sure that when it broke, it would break in ways that wouldn't kill us. Your advanced materials are stronger than ours, but they fail catastrophically. Ours fail gradually and keep working anyway." The philosophical implications of this approach began to sink in among the alien observers. The humans hadn't tried to build perfect technology. They had built imperfect technology operated by people who refused to let imperfection stop them. In the ship's small conference room, Ambassador Chen sat with a group of council representatives, providing a more detailed explanation of the rescue operation. The questions came rapidly, each revealing how fundamentally different human and alien approaches to problem-solving were. "But surely," pressed Councillor Zafani, "your engineers must have run probability calculations before attempting such a mission." "The odds of success were mathematically insignificant." Chen smiled. "They did run the calculations. The math said we had about a 3% chance of success and a 97% chance of dying horribly." "Then why proceed? How could you justify such risk?" "Because," Chen replied simply, 3,000 people needed help and 3% was better than 0%. In human culture we have a saying, the only easy day was yesterday. Today was supposed to be hard. We just decided to make it work anyway." The alien representatives exchanged glances, their various forms of communication creating a subtle symphony of confusion and growing respect. They were beginning to understand that they had fundamentally misunderstood what humans were capable of. High Counselor Varthek leaned forward, her crystalline form refracting the conference room's lights. "Ambassador Chen, the Galactic Council has observed many species throughout our history. We have seen technological marvels, biological adaptations beyond imagination, and intellectual achievements that reshape our understanding of the universe. But what we witnessed today was something entirely different." "What was that?" Chen asked. "Impossible determination made manifest through adequate technology. Your species succeeded not because your tools were superior, but because your people refused to accept failure as an option." Chen nodded. "That sounds about right. We're not the smartest species in the galaxy, or the strongest or the most advanced, but we're really, really good at not giving up." As Phoenix One limped toward the nearest council medical facility, word of the rescue spread throughout the galactic community. The species that had been dismissed as primitive newcomers had accomplished something that challenged the fundamental assumptions of advanced civilizations. But this was only the beginning. Unknown to the council representatives aboard Phoenix One, similar scenarios were playing out across human space. When people needed help, humans responded, regardless of the odds, regardless of the technology required, regardless of the personal cost. The galaxy was about to learn that humans didn't just refuse to give up on each other. They refused to give up on anyone, 3 weeks after the Kepler rescue, reports began filtering through Galactic Council intelligence networks that defied conventional understanding. Human ships were appearing in crisis situations across the galaxy, often in places where no human vessel should logically be present. More disturbing was their consistent success in scenarios where advanced civilizations had written off lives as lost. Admiral Kethavar sat in his private quarters aboard the Valorian flagship, studying the latest reports with growing unease. The data painted a picture that challenged everything the galactic community thought they knew about the newcomer species. "Computer, display incident summary for the past 20 standard cycles," he commanded. The holographic display materialized, showing a star map dotted with incident markers. Each represented a location where humans had intervened in what other species had considered hopeless situations. The Rigel 7 toxic gas leak, where aquatic coalition vessels had been unable to penetrate the poisonous atmosphere. Human environmental specialists had somehow jury-rigged atmospheric scrubbers using mining equipment and spent 36 hours in conditions that should have killed them within minutes. The vegan prime reactor failure, where even synthetic collective units had been unable to approach the radiation source. Human engineers had constructed makeshift radiation suits from medical shielding and space debris, then manually stabilized the reactor core with nothing more than basic tools and determination. Most recently, the Centauri station collision, where a massive space station had lost orbital stability and was falling toward a populated planet. While Council engineers debated complex trajectory modifications, a human cargo hauler had simply attached magnetic grapples to the station and used its own engines to push the structure back into stable orbit. How are they even finding out about these incidents? Kethver muttered to himself. Half of these crises weren't broadcast on public channels. His communications officer, Lieutenant Veshka, entered the room with obvious reluctance. "Sir, we've identified the source. The humans have established what they call an emergency response network using their civilian communication satellites." "Explain." "It appears that every human ship, station, and colony automatically monitors all emergency frequencies across multiple species communication protocols. When any distress signal is detected, it's immediately relayed through their network to the nearest human vessels capable of responding." Kethavar's 4 eyes widened in amazement. "They're monitoring everyone's emergency calls? That must require enormous computational resources and communication infrastructure." "That's what we thought, sir. But analysis shows they're using relatively primitive technology, distributed across thousands of small relay stations. Instead of building a few powerful monitoring systems, they've created a network of simple devices that collectively cover the entire galaxy." The Admiral leaned back in his chair, trying to process the implications. "So when anyone anywhere calls for help, the humans hear it. And apparently they respond regardless of whether the call was directed at them." Meanwhile, aboard the human vessel Perseverance, Captain Maria Santos received her 3rd emergency call of the week. Her cargo ship, designed to haul raw materials between mining operations, had been retrofitted with rescue equipment after the Kepler incident. The retrofitting had been done by volunteers at the nearest human outpost, using spare parts and what the engineering crew cheerfully called creative interpretation of safety regulations. "Captain," reported her communications officer, Ensign Williams, "we're receiving a distress call from the Zephyrian research vessel Contemplation of Stars. They're reporting life support failure in the Horsehead Nebula." Santos reviewed the tactical display. "Distance?" 14 hours at maximum burn. "But Captain, the Zephyrians breathe a methane-nitrogen mix. We don't have compatible life support for their species." "Then we'd better figure out how to make some," Santos replied without hesitation. "Williams, patch me through to Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez. If anyone can jury-rig a methane atmosphere in 14 hours, it's him." An hour later, Perseverance was racing through hyperspace while her crew performed what could only be described as miraculous improvisation. Using industrial atmospheric processors designed for terraforming, emergency medical equipment, and salvaged components from their cargo hold, they were constructing a life support system for a species they had never encountered. "The tricky part," explained Chief Rodriguez as he welded together improvised atmospheric regulators, "is that methane is highly explosive in oxygen-rich environments. We're basically building a controlled bomb that keeps people alive." "Can it be done safely?" asked Dr. Patterson, the ship's medical officer. Rodriguez grinned. Defined safely. It won't kill us, and it should keep them breathing. Beyond that, we're in uncharted territory. When Perseverance arrived at the contemplation of stars, they found a research vessel dead in space, its crew of 12 Zephyrians slowly suffocating as their life support systems failed one by one. The elegant curves of Zephyrian technology, designed for efficiency and beauty, had proven vulnerable to the electromagnetic interference of the nebula. "This is Captain Santos of the Terran vessel Perseverance. We're here to help." The response came in the musical tones characteristic of Zephyrian speech, translated by their universal communicators. "Captain Santos, this is Research Leader Venthasi. We appreciate your offer, but our atmospheric requirements are incompatible with human technology. Our own rescue vessels cannot reach us for 6 cycles. Research Leader, with respect, your rescue vessels aren't here and we are. We've prepared emergency life support compatible with your species. It's not pretty, but it'll keep you alive." What followed became another entry in the growing collection of impossible human rescues. The Perseverance's improvised life support system worked exactly as designed, which is to say barely. The methane atmosphere it generated was contaminated with trace gases that made it unpleasant to breathe. The temperature regulation fluctuated wildly, and the whole system had to be manually monitored to prevent catastrophic failure, but it worked. For 3 days, while they waited for Zephyrian rescue vessels to navigate the nebula's interference, 12 alien researchers breathed safely aboard a human cargo ship, cared for by a crew that had learned Zephyrian biology from emergency medical databases during the journey. Dr. Patterson worked tirelessly with the Zephyrian research team, adapting human medical techniques to treat altitude sickness-like symptoms caused by atmospheric contamination. "The interesting thing," she explained to Research Leader Venthasi, "is that while our species evolved in completely different environments, the basic principles of respiratory distress are universal. How did your people know to attempt such a rescue?" Venthasi asked, their translator struggling with the complex harmonics of amazement. "Zephyrian biology is not well documented in galactic databases." "We didn't know," Patterson admitted. "We had maybe 6 hours of research time to figure out how to keep you alive. Chief Rodriguez built the life support system, based on chemical analysis of your distress beacon's atmospheric readings. The Zephyrian sensory organs fluttered in what their species considered extreme emotional response. You risked your lives and your ship based on chemical analysis from a distress beacon? Well," Patterson smiled, "what else were we going to do? Let you die because we didn't have the right equipment?" By the time Zephyrian rescue vessels arrived, the contemplation of stars had been fully evacuated, and its crew was in stable condition aboard Perseverance. The rescue coordinators found a cargo ship that had been transformed into a multi-species medical facility using equipment that violated approximately 47 different safety regulations. "How is this possible?" asked Rescue Coordinator Minthari as they surveyed the improvised medical bay. "Your atmospheric processing system should have exploded within hours of activation." Chief Rodriguez wiped methane condensation from his hands and shrugged. "Yeah, it should have. We've been manually adjusting the mixture every 20 minutes to prevent that. Turns out if you pay attention and don't mind losing sleep, you can make almost anything work." The Zephyrian rescue team exchanged what their species considered meaningful looks. They were witnessing something that their highly advanced, safety-conscious civilization had never contemplated. Technology operated beyond its design parameters by people who refused to let minor details like impossible stop them from saving lives. As news of the Zephyrian rescue spread, it joined the growing collection of human intervention stories that were beginning to worry certain elements of the Galactic Council. The humans weren't just helping people, they were demonstrating that advanced technology and careful planning could be replaced by determination and creative problem-solving. More concerning was the pattern that was emerging. Every human rescue succeeded regardless of the odds. Every human crew found a way to make inadequate technology perform beyond its limits. Every human response team treated impossible as a starting point rather than a conclusion. The galaxy was beginning to understand that humans didn't just refuse to accept defeat. They actively sought out situations where defeat seemed inevitable, then proved everyone wrong. But some observers were asking uncomfortable questions. If humans could consistently achieve the impossible with primitive technology, what did that say about the rest of galactic civilization? And more importantly, what would happen when humans finally developed technology that matched their determination? The Emergency Council session convened in the highest security chamber on Galactic Council Prime, with representatives from every major civilization present either physically or through quantum relay. The topic wasn't listed on official records, but every delegate knew they were here to discuss what intelligence reports had begun calling the human problem. High Counselor, Barthek's crystalline form pulsed with agitated patterns as she addressed the assembly. In the 6 standard months since the Kepler rescue, human intervention teams have responded to 237 emergency situations across Council space. Their success rate is 100%. A ripple of unease passed through the assembled delegates. Ambassador Zethkri of the Valorian Empire leaned forward, his 4 eyes reflecting the chamber's lights. High Counselor, while we appreciate human assistance, surely their methods raise concerns about safety protocols and proper authorization procedures. Indeed, agreed Counselor Threndy of the Aquatic Coalition. The humans routinely violate fundamental safety regulations, operate equipment beyond design specifications, and enter situations that our best analysts classify as certain death scenarios. That they succeed is troubling. Admiral Kethvar, attending as a military observer, activated his holoprojector. The data is more concerning than simple success rates suggest. Analysis of human rescue operations reveals systematic disregard for technological limitations, safety margins, and probability calculations. They consistently achieve results that our most advanced simulations predict are impossible. The display showed incident after incident, humans rescuing crews from quantum storms that should have torn apart their ships, extracting survivors from collapsed structures using construction equipment as life support systems, even performing emergency surgery on species they had never encountered using improvised medical techniques. What disturbs me most, continued Kethvar, is their expansion pattern. Human emergency response teams are now operating in 73% of Council space. They're establishing supply caches, communication relays, and what they call emergency response stations without formal authorization. Counselor Zephani's antennae twitched nervously. Are we suggesting the humans pose some kind of security threat? Their technology is still centuries behind our own. That's exactly the problem, interjected Professor Venthasi, the Zephyrian research leader who had been rescued by the cargo ship Perseverance. They had been invited to provide first-hand testimony about human rescue methods. Their technology is primitive, but their effectiveness is unprecedented. They succeed through principles that our science cannot adequately explain. The chamber fell silent as delegates contemplated the implications. The humans were spreading throughout the galaxy not through conquest or trade agreements, but through an endless series of rescue operations that no one could reasonably object to. There's another issue, added Admiral Kethvar grimly. Our intelligence suggests that human rescue operations are not random. They appear to be following some kind of strategic pattern, establishing presence in key systems under the guise of emergency response. Ambassador Chen Wei, representing the Terran Federation, had remained silent throughout the discussion. Now she stood, her simple blue uniform stark against the elaborate ceremonial garments of the other delegates. Honored representatives, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. If I may address these concerns directly? High Counselor Varthek's form brightened slightly. Please, Ambassador Chen. The Council would appreciate clarification of Terran intentions. Chen smiled and several delegates shifted uncomfortably. They were beginning to recognize that particular human expression as a prelude to unsettling revelations. The Terran Federation appreciates the Council's concern about our emergency response activities. However, I believe there may be some misunderstanding about our motivations and methods. She activated her own holoprojector, displaying a different view of the same data the Council had been analyzing. What you're seeing isn't strategic expansion or disregard for safety protocols. What you're seeing is human nature applied to galactic civilization. The display showed the same rescue operations but from a different perspective. Instead of focusing on technological violations and impossible successes, it highlighted the human cost of each operation. Crew rotations that pushed people beyond exhaustion. Volunteers who risked everything for strangers. Improvise solutions that only worked because people refused to let them fail. Every human ship in space carries emergency response equipment. Chen continued. Every human crew is trained in basic rescue operations. Every human colony maintains supplies for species they've never encountered. This isn't strategic planning, it's cultural conditioning. What do you mean? Asked Counselor Threndy. On Earth, humans developed a saying, leave no one behind. It's not a tactical doctrine or a philosophical position. It's a fundamental assumption about how civilized beings behave. When we joined the galactic community, we simply applied the same principle on a larger scale. The chamber erupted in multilingual discussion as delegates tried to process this explanation. The idea that an entire species would extend unlimited assistance to complete strangers purely out of cultural reflex was unprecedented in galactic history. Professor Venthasi spoke up over the chatter. Ambassador Chen, during my rescue, your crew risked their lives using equipment that by all probability calculations should have failed catastrophically. How do you explain such disregard for personal safety? Chen's expression grew serious. Professor, may I ask you a question? When your research vessel was dying in the nebula, what would you have done if you had found another ship in distress? We would have called for appropriate rescue services and provided what assistance our safety protocols allowed. And if rescue services couldn't reach them in time, if following safety protocols meant watching people die, the Zephyrian sensory organs flickered with uncertainty. Such scenarios are precisely why we have safety protocols, to prevent individuals from making decisions that could result in multiple casualties. I see, Chen nodded. And that's the fundamental difference between human and galactic approaches to crisis response. You've developed systems to minimize risk and prevent bad outcomes. We've developed people who accept risk and create good outcomes. Admiral Kethvar leaned forward intently. Are you saying humans deliberately choose dangerous solutions over safe ones? Not exactly. We choose effective solutions over safe ones. Sometimes those happen to be the same thing. Sometimes they're not. But we never choose safe inaction over dangerous action when lives are at stake. The implications of this statement created another wave of discussion among the delegates. They were beginning to understand that the human approach to galactic citizenship was fundamentally incompatible with established council procedures. High Counselor Varthek finally restored order. Ambassador Chen, the Council appreciates the Terran Federation's commitment to preserving life. However, your methods create precedents that could destabilize established emergency response protocols throughout the galaxy. How so? Other species are beginning to request human assistance specifically, bypassing their own government's emergency services. Some worlds have begun modifying their own rescue procedures to match human methods. There are reports of non-human crews attempting impossible rescue operations because humans would do it. Chen smiled again, and this time her expression carried genuine warmth. High Counselor, with respect, that sounds like a good thing. If other species are learning to help each other more effectively, isn't that exactly what galactic civilization should encourage? The question hung in the air as delegates contemplated its implications. The humans weren't just succeeding at impossible rescues, they were teaching other species that impossible rescues were possible. There's something else, Chen continued. Something I think the Council should understand about human emergency response philosophy. She paused, looking around the chamber at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. We're not doing this for political advantage or strategic positioning. We're doing it because it's the right thing to do, and we'll keep doing it regardless of Council approval or disapproval, because that's who we are. The silence that followed was broken by Professor Venthasi. Ambassador Chen, are you suggesting that humans will continue emergency response operations even if the Council formally objects? Professor, let me put it this way. If your ship was dying in space tomorrow and the Council had forbidden human assistance, do you think that would stop Captain Santos from coming to get you? The Zephyrian's response was immediate and certain. No, it would not, Chen nodded. Then you understand humans perfectly. As the session adjourned, delegates filed out with more questions than answers. The humans had made it clear that they would continue being human regardless of galactic opinion. The question facing the Council was whether to resist this influence or embrace it. But in Council chambers throughout the galaxy, similar conversations were taking place. Species that had accepted calculated losses as inevitable were beginning to ask uncomfortable questions about their own capabilities, and assumptions, the humans hadn't just demonstrated that impossible rescues were. 6 months after the emergency council session, the crisis that galactic leaders had feared finally arrived. The distress call came from the edge of council space, where the research station Deep Void 7 had been conducting long-term studies of dark matter phenomena. The message was brief and terrifying. Station compromised. Dark matter cascade event in progress. Evacuating all personnel. Send help. What followed was a communication blackout that lasted 18 hours. When contact was finally re-established, the situation was worse than anyone had imagined. The dark matter experiment had torn a hole in space-time itself, creating what the station's surviving scientists described as a reality anomaly that was slowly consuming everything within a 50-kilometer radius. The Galactic Council's response was swift and decisive. They assembled the largest rescue fleet in recorded history, 12 capital ships from 6 different species, equipped with the most advanced emergency response technology available. The fleet included quantum-shielded vessels that could survive black hole encounters, temporal stabilizers designed to operate in fractured space-time, and enough firepower to evacuate an entire planet. Admiral Kethvar commanded the rescue fleet from the Valorian dreadnought Eternal Vigilance, the most advanced vessel in Council space. As they approached the anomaly, what they found defied description. The reality distortion had created a sphere of twisted space where the normal laws of physics no longer applied. Inside the sphere, Deep Void 7 floated like a broken toy, its structure partially phased out of normal reality. Science Officer Jekti, report, ordered Kethvar. Sir, the anomaly is generating massive gravitational fluctuations and temporal distortions. Our quantum shields are stable, but any vessel entering the distortion field will experience severe reality displacement. We estimate a 98% probability of complete molecular dissolution. And the survivors? Long-range sensors detect approximately 40 life signs still aboard the station. However, they appear to be trapped in a temporal loop, existing in multiple probability states simultaneously. Admiral Kethvar studied the tactical display with growing unease. The best scientific minds in the galaxy had spent the journey calculating rescue scenarios, and every simulation ended the same way. Total mission failure, with massive loss of life. Options? Sir, the synthetic collectives units might survive long enough to establish a quantum anchor point, but the probability calculations suggest they would lose cohesion within minutes. The Aquatic Coalition's bioships could potentially adapt to the reality fluctuations, but not while maintaining life support for other species. The Admiral closed his 4 eyes, contemplating an impossible decision. 40 people were dying in conditions that no known technology could survive. The assembled fleet represented the pinnacle of galactic civilization's capabilities, and it wasn't enough. Sir, reported the communications officer, we're receiving a transmission from the human vessel Indomitable. They're requesting permission to attempt a rescue. Kethvar's eyes snapped open. What human vessel? There are no human ships assigned to this operation. Sir, the Indomitable is a converted mining vessel. They've been monitoring our emergency frequencies and have been en route since the initial distress call. On the main viewer, a battered cargo ship appeared, scarred metal hull, improvised modifications welded onto every available surface, and heat signatures that suggested engineering systems running far beyond safe parameters. It looked like exactly what it was, a working vessel that had been hastily converted for emergency response by people who cared more about effectiveness than appearances. Admiral Kethvar, this is Captain Rebecca Torres of the Terran vessel Indomitable. We're here to help. The Admiral activated his communication system with a heavy heart. Captain Torres, I appreciate the offer, but this situation is beyond our current capabilities. The Council fleet is withdrawing to establish a quarantine perimeter around the anomaly. Understood, Admiral. What's the status of the survivors? 40 personnel trapped in a reality distortion that our best technology cannot penetrate. We estimate they have perhaps 6 hours before the temporal loop collapses and they're lost permanently. There was a pause on the channel before Torres responded. Admiral, with respect, 40 people is 40 people. We'd like to give it a try. Kethvar felt the familiar mixture of amazement and exasperation that had become associated with human emergency response. Captain, our quantum-shielded vessels cannot survive the anomaly. Your ship has no reality displacement protection whatsoever. That's true, sir. But our ship also doesn't rely on quantum coherence to maintain structural integrity. Sometimes primitive is better. What happened next became the stuff of legend throughout the galaxy. While the Council fleet maintained safe distance, the human mining vessel Indomitable flew directly into the reality anomaly. Instead of the sophisticated approach that advanced technology demanded, they used what Captain Torres called the direct method. The thing about reality distortions, explained Chief Engineer Lisa Park over the communication channel, her voice crackling through dimensional interference, is that they only affect things that are quantumly complex. Basic matter and energy follow simpler rules. The Indomitable was indeed basic. Its hull was simple steel alloy, its engines were chemical rockets, and its life support was mechanical rather than electronic. As it penetrated the anomaly, the ship began to experience reality displacement but not catastrophic failure. Hull integrity holding, reported Torres as her ship twisted through fractured spacetime. The temporal distortions are affecting our navigation, but we're maintaining structural cohesion. Admiral Cathvar watched in amazement as the primitive human vessel succeeded where advanced technology had failed. The Indomitable's simplicity made it immune to the quantum effects that would have destroyed more sophisticated ships. But reaching the station was only the beginning. The survivors aboard Deep Void 7 were trapped in a temporal loop that made normal rescue impossible. Every time the human crew attempted to evacuate them, the rescued personnel would phase back to their original positions as time reset. "We need to break the temporal loop," announced Dr. Martinez, the Indomitable's science officer. "But that requires destabilizing the dark matter cascade that's generating the anomaly." "How do we destabilize dark matter?" asked Torres. "Honestly, I have no idea. Dark matter physics is about 50 years ahead of anything we understand." There was silence on the bridge as the crew contemplated the problem. Around them, the reality anomaly continued to twist space and time, creating conditions that no human had ever encountered. The rescue was impossible, but they were here anyway. "Captain," called out engineering specialist Rodriguez from the cargo bay, "what if we don't destabilize the dark matter? What if we just give it something bigger to interact with?" "Explain." "The temporal loop is caused by the dark matter creating a closed causality loop. But loops can be broken if you introduce enough mass energy to overwhelm the system." Torres understood immediately. "You want to ram the station?" "Not exactly. I want to ram the anomaly itself with our fusion reactor. If we overload the reactor core and detonate it inside the distortion field, the energy release might be enough to break the temporal lock." The plan was insane even by human standards. It involved deliberately destroying their own ship to create an explosion that might disrupt exotic physics they barely understood. The survival chances for the crew were essentially zero. "How long to implement?" Torres asked. 20 minutes to jury-rig the reactor for overload. Another 10 to evacuate the survivors and get to minimum safe distance. Do it. What the Galactic Council fleet witnessed next challenged their understanding of human psychology. The crew of the Indomitable worked with calm efficiency to prepare their own destruction, treating certain death as just another engineering problem to be solved. "Admiral," Torres transmitted to Cathvar, "we're preparing to break the temporal loop. Our crew will evacuate with the survivors in the cargo shuttle. The ship will automatically detonate when the reactor reaches critical mass. Captain, the energy release from a fusion reactor explosion in a reality anomaly is completely unpredictable. You could create an even larger distortion, or we could save 40 people," Torres replied simply. "Admiral, it's been an honor serving alongside the Council fleet." The Indomitable's shuttle launched just as the ship's reactor reached critical overload. The explosion that followed lit up the anomaly like a dying star, the fusion energy interacting with dark matter in ways that physicists would spend decades trying to understand. When the light faded, the reality distortion was gone. Deep Void 7 drifted in normal space, its crew alive and rescued. The mining vessel Indomitable was debris scattered across a cubic kilometer of space. But 43 people were alive who should have been lost forever, saved by humans who had flown into impossible conditions with equipment that shouldn't have worked and succeeded through determination that defied rational explanation. Admiral Cathvar stared at the tactical display for long moments before opening a communication channel to the Council fleet. "All vessels, this is Admiral Cathvar. Today we have witnessed something that will be remembered throughout galactic history. Log it in the official records. The humans did it again. As rescue vessels moved to Kali, 1 year after the Deep Void 7 incident, the Galactic Council convened for what historians would later call the Recognition Accords. The Grand Assembly Hall on Council Prime had been reconfigured to accommodate not just the traditional representatives of major civilizations, but also a new category of attendee, human emergency response coordinators from across the galaxy. High Counselor Varthek's crystalline form pulsed with ceremonial patterns as she addressed the unprecedented gathering. Distinguished delegates, we convene today to formally acknowledge what the galaxy has come to understand through repeated demonstration. Humanity has redefined our conception of what is possible in crisis response. The statistics were undeniable. In the 18 months since the Kepler rescue, human emergency response teams had successfully intervened in over 800 crisis situations. Their success rate remained at 100%, despite taking on scenarios that other species had classified as hopeless. More significantly, their methods were being adopted throughout the galaxy. Ambassador Chen Wei stood at the human delegation table, but she was no longer alone. Beside her sat Captain Torres, posthumously awarded the Council's highest honor for civilian bravery, Colonel Martinez, Chief Engineer Rodriguez, and dozens of other humans whose names had become synonymous with impossible rescues. The Terran Federation, continued Varthek, has demonstrated capabilities that challenge our fundamental assumptions about the relationship between technological advancement and operational effectiveness. We gather today to formally integrate human emergency response protocols into Council standard procedures. The proposal that followed was revolutionary: the establishment of the Galactic Emergency Response Corps, a joint organization that would combine advanced alien technology with human operational methods. Every Council species would contribute their most sophisticated equipment and scientific knowledge, while humans would provide leadership, training, and what official documents carefully termed unconventional problem-solving approaches. Admiral Kethvar, now serving as the military liaison to the new organization, stood to address the assembly. The Corps will operate under human command structure and protocols. This represents a fundamental shift in how the Council approaches crisis response, but the evidence supports this decision. The evidence was indeed overwhelming. Detailed analysis of human rescue operations had revealed patterns that defied conventional military and scientific thinking. Humans routinely succeeded because they assumed success was possible, and then worked backward to make it happen, rather than calculating probabilities and accepting limitations. The key insight, explained Dr. Sarah Kim, now the Corps' chief medical officer, is that most impossible situations are only impossible if you accept traditional constraints. Humans excel at recognizing which constraints are real and which are merely conventional. The Valorian delegate, Ambassador Zethkri, raised a concern that many species shared. While we acknowledge human effectiveness, their methods involve levels of personal risk that many species find uncomfortable. How will the Corps address different cultural attitudes toward acceptable casualties? Colonel Martinez stood to respond. Ambassador, the Corps will respect each species' cultural boundaries regarding personal risk. However, we've found that when people see what's actually possible, many choose to expand their own boundaries. She activated a holographic display showing Corps training facilities that had been established throughout the galaxy. The images were remarkable. Valorian warriors learning to jury-rig equipment beyond design specifications, aquatic coalition engineers practicing rapid deployment solutions, synthetic collective units developing intuitive decision-making protocols. What we're teaching isn't recklessness, Martinez continued. We're teaching calculated courage. The calculation just uses different variables than most species are accustomed to. Professor Venthasi, the Zephyrian researcher who had been rescued by the cargo ship Perseverance, provided additional testimony. The Corps training program has fundamentally changed how my research team approaches problem-solving. We no longer accept initial failure as final failure. This has applications far beyond emergency response. This was perhaps the most significant impact of human integration into galactic civilization. Species that had accepted technological and procedural limitations for millennia were discovering that many of those limitations were self-imposed. The human approach of treating impossible as a starting point rather than a conclusion was spreading throughout the galaxy. Captain Santos, now commanding the Corps' flagship vessel Unity, reported on recent operations. Last month we responded to the Proxima Colony asteroid impact. Traditional evacuation would have saved maybe 30% of the population. Using integrated human council technology and protocols, we evacuated 97%. The Unity itself was a marvel of integrated technology. Its hull combined Valorian quantum shielding with human redundancy engineering. Its engines used synthetic collective efficiency protocols with human override capabilities. Its medical bay could treat any known species using techniques that combined advanced alien science with human improvisational medicine. But the real success, Santos continued, isn't technological. It's cultural. We now have mixed species crews who think like humans when facing impossible situations. The assembled delegates reviewed crew reports that would have been incomprehensible 2 years earlier. Valorian engineers voluntarily working in conditions that exceeded their species' safety protocols. Aquatic coalition medics treating patients using untested procedures because conventional treatment wasn't working. Zephyrian scientists abandoning careful experimental protocols to implement emergency solutions in real time. High Counselor Varthek addressed the fundamental question underlying the entire proceedings. The integration of human emergency response culture has clearly improved our collective capabilities. However, some observers express concern about the broader implications. Are we witnessing the emergence of a new galactic civilization? Ambassador Chen smiled, the expression that delegates had learned to recognize as a prelude to profound insights. High Counselor, I think we're witnessing the emergence of a civilization that finally matches its technology. For thousands of years, the galaxy has possessed incredible tools, but limited them through conservative thinking. Humans didn't bring new technology. We brought new ways of thinking about what technology can accomplish. The truth of this statement was evident in the transformation taking place throughout Council space. Emergency response times had improved by orders of magnitude. Survival rates in crisis situations had increased dramatically. More importantly, the concept of acceptable losses was disappearing from official planning documents. There's something else, Chen continued. Something that I think explains why human methods work when traditional approaches fail. She paused, looking around the chamber at representatives of species from across the galaxy. Most civilizations develop emergency response protocols designed to minimize additional casualties. They accept that some people will be lost in order to ensure that rescuers survive to help others. This is logical, practical, and completely reasonable. The chamber fell silent as delegates recognized the direction of her argument. Humans developed emergency response protocols designed to maximize lives saved, period. We accept that rescuers might be lost in order to ensure that everyone else survives. This is illogical, impractical, and completely unreasonable. But it works, added Colonel Martinez quietly. It works, Chen agreed, because when you refuse to accept any casualties as inevitable, you find ways to prevent all casualties. When you plan for everyone to survive, everyone usually does. The recognition accords were formally signed by every council species, establishing humanity not just as equals in galactic civilization, but as leaders in the fundamental mission of preserving life. The humans who had once been dismissed as primitive newcomers were now recognized as teachers, whose lessons were reshaping the galaxy. As the ceremony concluded, Admiral Kethvar approached Ambassador Chen privately. I have a question that has bothered me since the Kepler rescue. How did you know? How did your species know that impossible rescues were possible? Chen considered the question carefully. Admiral, I think it's because humans never really believed they were impossible. We always assumed that if people needed help, there had to be a way to help them. We just had to be stubborn enough to find it. And if you had been wrong, if the rescue attempts had failed, then we would have died trying. But at least the people we were trying to save would have known that someone cared enough to try. Admiral Kethvar nodded slowly, finally understanding the fundamental difference between human and alien approaches to crisis response. Other species calculated odds and made rational decisions. Humans decided what outcome they wanted and then found a way to make it happen. As delegates departed Council Prime, carrying news of the recognition accords to their home worlds, a new era of galactic civilization began. An era where impossible was no longer accepted as an answer, where acceptable losses was no longer considered acceptable, and where the response to any crisis was simple: how do we save everyone?